Hey guys, Anthony Pietrobono here, online coach, trainer, and lifetime student. For today's video, we're gonna go over the 4 main ways of how to gain muscle. So this video is strictly for people who are trying to gain the most amount of muscle in the shortest period of time. So I'm gonna be helping you guys maximize your muscular hypertrophy in the shortest amount of time. So if you're looking to optimize your strength, gain strength in a faster manner, or optimize your performance in some other way, then you won't want to be implementing all of these tips, but you can definitely learn a lot and take away what's going to be benefiting you and implement it in your training program. So we're going to go over the 4 main ways of how to gain muscle. The first one is mechanical stress. The second one is metabolic stress. The third one is cell swelling, and the fourth one is exercise-induced muscle damage. Now, you're going to want to implement all 4 of these stressors into your training program to ensure that you're getting the most muscle in the shortest amount of period of time. Now, if you just take advantage of 2 or 3 of these stressors, or even one, you can't be maximizing your muscle gain because your body is going to be getting used to those stressors, and there is a diminishing return on how much you can just implement on those stressors. Let's dive into the first one, being mechanical stress. Now, mechanical stress is pretty much induced by mechanical tension. You're placing mechanical tension on the working muscle. This is basically using heavier loads, working at the 70 to 90% of your 1 rep max, even actually sub-signaling from doing 1 rep maxes, so up to 100% of your 1 rep max. Now, this basically means that you're just using a load anywhere from 70 to 100% of your 1 rep max, which is pretty much 15 to 1 rep max weight, and you're loading that muscle under tension. Let's dive into the first one, being mechanical stress. Given the name, it is induced by mechanical tension. Now, mechanical tension is essentially when you're working with loads anywhere from the 80% to 100% of your 1 rep max. Now, that's pretty much a 10 rep max to a 1 rep max. So when you're working in the 1 to 10 rep range of your 1 rep max, you are using maximal loads, and that's applying mechanical tension on the working muscle. Now, this tension is such a greater load that it is applying intracellular signaling to signal muscle protein synthesis by a variety of pathways that we can get into more detail later, actually. Pretty much sending signals saying we need to be accreting more protein to repair and combat this damaging signal. Now, with that signal, the muscle is seeing that I need to be adapting to this heavier load. That's pretty much what the signal means. I need to be adapting to this heavier load, so I'm going to send my body this signal to accelerate muscle protein synthesis, so that way I can start initiating some repair signaling and some tissue remodeling to prepare, so that way later on I can handle this same load better. That's essentially mechanical tension, which is the mechanical stress signal that is a result of it. So that is the first main way of how to gain muscle. Now, you don't want to be overdoing mechanical stress. However, research has actually concluded that mechanical stress is the #1 way to gain muscle the fastest. So this is the most important factor when it comes to gaining muscle. You need to be implementing some sort of mechanical tension and getting mechanical stress out of it. With that being said, you don't want to overdo it because, of course, you're working at heavier loads. If you're pounding your body with only heavier loads over a prolonged period of time, you're going to be running into some tendon, ligament, and joint issues. It's a given. If you're overtraining and all of your training comprises of that, you're going to need some training that's going to be lighter load. You need to be having periods of lighter loads. You need to be periodizing your training. That's the main issue there. That's just all you need to do. Is if you periodize it and you have times of all these stressors, then you're gonna make sure everything's okay. All right, so that's #1. #2 is going straight into metabolic stress. Before jumping into this next mechanism, I thought it's actually more important that I actually describe that there's 4 anabolic pathways to gaining muscle. So when I say, these intracellular signaling pathways, or, there's these signals being sent, they're being sent through these different pathways that are turning on and turning off different switches. Now, there's 4 main anabolic pathways. Anabolic essentially means protein building, which can also relate to muscle building, but it's not always the case. Now, of these 4 pathways, the first one being the PL3K pathway, the second one is the calcium-dependent pathway, the third one is the phosphatidic acid pathway, and the fourth one is the MAPK pathway. There's honestly plenty more pathways, but those are the 4 most known researched pathways that are relating to muscle building. And then there's also 4 catabolic pathways that are known for the protein turnover and protein degradation. Now that can relate to losing muscle mass in some cases. I'm not going to go into detail of those. Again, there's many more pathways, but just understand that there's a lot of important pathways that are switching on and switching off protein synthesis. And there's signals that are sent to turn on or turn off these pathway switches that are going to be either making more protein and using more protein, or breaking down protein for fuel or for other uses. Now, we just need to understand that point. The science is far from coming to conclusion on what exactly all of the pathways do, but there is a fair amount of research on the 4 main anabolic pathways and the 4 main catabolic pathways. But with that being said, we're going to jump on to that second point. Like I said, the second main driver of hypertrophy is metabolic stress. Metabolic stress is an exercise-induced accumulation of metabolites, particularly inorganic phosphate, lactate, and hydrogen ions. So its training particularly lasts anywhere from 15 to 120 seconds, and this actually causes acute hypoxia in the muscle cells. So they're not getting required oxygen because of the consistent contraction and release of these metabolites. So all these metabolites are building up through muscle contractions. Each time a muscle contraction occurs, lactate, inorganic phosphates, and hydrogen ions are all built up, and they need to be expelled with oxygen. Now, oxygen does not get delivered to a muscle cell when it's consistently being contracted. Now, oxygen can only be delivered to a muscle cell when it's done contracting. So if you're contracting a muscle consistently, there's no oxygen that can be delivered to remove these metabolites. Now, this is exactly how the muscle gets built, because lactate alone is just one of the metabolites that acutely, instantly induces muscle protein synthesis in that area. So if there is a lactate buildup, then muscle protein synthesis will be signaled, and the pathway will be turned on. With that, hypoxia, hypoxia is when the muscle or area is not getting blood flow. Now, acute hypoxia also instantly turns on muscle protein synthesis as well. Now, it's a signal, again, goes through the pathway, and it has some anti-catabolic pathways signaling that we need protein to come to this area. We need to be reforming and we need to be repairing this area because there's no oxygen being delivered to repair it. So we need to be sending it by other means. Now, that's just another way. So there's lactate that instantly signals the muscle protein synthesis. There's hypoxia. Now, this exercise that it lasts anywhere from 15 to 120 seconds, that's typically the range of working anywhere between the 8 to 20 rep range. So if you're working in 8 to 20 reps or higher, then you're inducing metabolic stress on the working muscle. Now, tons of literature has actually come out and proving that metabolic stress alone, these stressors, they induce muscle protein synthesis and can actually lead to greater gains in the extended period after the training bout. This metabolic stress can amplify these signals for the 24 to 48 hours after the fact and still be recovering and having heightened protein synthesis longer than mechanical tension can have. But again, the mechanical tension and mechanical stress is simply another factor that is using different pathways to remodel the tissue. So like I said, see, these are different pathways that you need to be taking advantage of to be growing your muscle. Research has shown that there's 4 main factors mediating hypertrophic adaptations from exercise-induced metabolic stress. The first one being an increased muscle fiber recruitment. Now, we know from research as well that we need to be using heavier loads to actually be tapping into those higher threshold muscle fibers. We know that your muscle fibers actually get used in order of from smallest to largest, so we're going to be tapping into those larger muscle fibers when we get up to those heavier loads. Now, metabolic stress is actually pretty much a hack to that, and research has shown that. Now, when you're inducing metabolic stress, you get the same effect as if you're using a heavier weight, because heavier loads are going to be inducing the smaller, and when you get up to the higher loads, even pretty much 90% of those muscle fibers. Now, research has shown that when you get close to fatiguing from metabolic stress, if you get up to that 20 rep range, you're doing that 20th repetition, that's the same exact effect having in terms of muscle fiber recruitment as using heavier load as if you just did a 3 rep max. It's very fascinating. Now, so the goal is pretty much if you get to that same level of fatigue, you're still going to be recruiting all of the muscle fibers. The second factor is the alteration of myokine production. The third factor is the accumulation of reactive oxygen species. And the fourth factor is actually the elevation of systemic hormone production. To take full advantage of the various pathways of muscle growth through metabolic stress, you're going to want to incorporate giant sets, drop sets, supersets, lots of different set intensifiers. You want to be kind of sprinkling that in throughout your training program, or having specific periodized weeks where you're going to be going through that higher volume and really taking advantage of metabolic stress. Now you can also take advantage of having lower rest periods. Again, you won't always want lower rest periods, because if you're having consistently low rest periods, then you can't take advantage of the mechanical stress, and you can't be resting long enough to be using loads high enough to take advantage of mechanical stress, which again is the number one way to elicit hypertrophy. So again, hand in hand, that's why it's some give and take. There's times and places for everything. Another training methodology that actually branches off of taking advantage of metabolic stress is actually blood flow restriction training, which is known as occlusion training. It's essentially where you could take a tourniquet or even some knee wraps and cut off the venous blood flow supply back to the heart. So you can't, what you're doing is you're occluding a limb. It could be the leg or the arm. And what you're gonna be doing is performing a very light load, loads between 20 and 40% of your 1 rep max. This is essentially, we're gonna be performing 8 to 20 repetitions at that load. It's a very light load, and it's very interesting because studies are actually finding that you can accumulate just as much growth with half of the load as you would have when you're occluding the limb, or if you're using the arm or the leg. So you can target the biceps, triceps, quads, hamstrings, calves. All these muscles they found, actually more specifically, there was one study where they found this in the extensors. So in the tricep muscle, they noticed that there was exact similar growth over an 8-week period, where there was one group who was prescribed the occluded training group, where they did 3 sets of a tricep extension and with the arm occluded at 20 to 40% of their 1 rep max, and they were performing 15 repetitions, and they kept the arm occluded for those 3 sets. They kept it on the whole time, and versus a group who actually performed the same thing. They did 3 sets of 10 repetitions without occluding their arm at 80%, and the growth was exactly the same. Now, it's important to note that these were both untrained subjects as well, so that can have some skewing. But anyway, regardless, the fact that the growth was even to the same extent is because, again, taking advantage of different pathways, where they're taking advantage of that metabolite accumulation and that acute hypoxia to promote the muscle protein synthesis. So that I'm not going to dive much more into detail. I'll come out with another video if you guys would like me to touch more on exactly how to incorporate occlusion training in your training protocol, and exactly more science about it. I can make a full video covering some studies that are backing occlusion training if you guys are interested. So you guys can let me know as well. That's going to be branching off onto metabolic stress. And we're going to be going into the third factor, but I'm going to make another video for that. So that's going to conclude this video. I'm just going over those 2 main drivers of hypertrophy. That is mechanical stress and metabolic stress. In the next video, I'm going to be breaking it apart, and we're going to be going fully into cell swelling and exercise-induced muscle damage. Those are going to be the last 2, and I'll have much more research. I'm going to go over it, and it's going to be posted within 3 days of this video. So again, hope you guys enjoyed this video and found some great value and actually actionable tips. That's what I'm really going for here. Hopefully you guys found some actionable tips that you guys can just implement right into your training programs to incorporate some mechanical stress and some metabolic stress. Have a healthy balance of those. Or I hope you also opened your eyes to the approach of periodizing your training, to having some weeks where you might be overemphasizing mechanical stress, and then maybe you have some weeks later on where you're going to be overemphasizing metabolic stress, and you might up the rep range and go for some higher rep ranges and maybe some lower rests comparison to some lower rep ranges and some higher reps. It's all about periodization. It's all about timing. You always want to be, not always, you want to be manipulating specific variables, but you don't want to be having too much change, because too much change doesn't allow the body to adapt to that given stimulus. So again, going over those 2 points, hope you guys enjoyed it, and make sure you're subscribed so you guys can actually find out the rest of the tips and exactly those drivers of hypertrophy. Again, these are all backed by science. These are all backed by plenty of studies, tons of studies and peer-reviewed literature going over these four main drivers of hypertrophy. So again, thanks for watching. Feel free to give me a thumbs up if you found some value and enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in that next one. Peace.